This week in Beyond the Headlines, discussions on UK White Paper come to a close.
I think there are a number of things that we need to also address as principles, basic principles to underpin the White Paper and the new relationship. But it must all start with a mutual respect, because we in the OTs have our own aspirations as a people as to where we would like to see our country be taken, direction that we want to go, how far we've come, and where we want to go. And those aspirations should not, in a sense, be cast aside because some functionaries in the United Kingdom think that we should do something different.
The future relationship between the UK and its overseas territories in many regards hinges upon the development of a new UK White Paper, which according to the UK government will include submissions made by the overseas territories as to what they believe their relationship with the UK should be. Each territory was invited to give their response on the FCO website to 6 key discussion areas that were born out of the UK's goals that would assist them in the development of their White Paper, which outlines the relationship the UK shares with its 16 overseas territories. There were some territories who believed the time for consultation and submission of ideas on the White Paper was insufficient, whereas past consultations gave the OTs up to a year. Now they were only given 3 months. In addition, the BVI was in the heat of the 2011 November general election when the call for discussion on the document was made. The 6 discussion areas were challenges, cooperation with the UK, governance, financial management and economic planning, external support, cooperation between territories, and global profile of the territories. In keeping with the UK's request, the government of the Virgin Islands, through a radio program, email submissions and public meeting, sensitized the public on the White Paper and gathered their responses on the various questions posed by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. On Wednesday, January 18th, despite heavy rains, a small group gathered at the meeting held in the Cultural Centre, where Attorney-at-Law Gerard Ferrara, QC, Elise Donovan of Financial Services and Najan Christopher, Assistant Secretary for External Affairs in the Premier's Office, examined various aspects of the White Paper and heard from the small audience what their own concerns were regarding the document. As the meeting got underway, Gerard Ferrara spoke about the existing relationship between the UK and the overseas territories and stated that although neither the UK nor the overseas territories, and in this case the BVI, want to reach the position where the overseas territory is dependent upon the UK, there is no indication that the UK is looking out for the interest of the BVI. Ferrara looked at financial services and tourism, the 2 economic pillars of the BVI, and said that in looking out for its own interest, the BVI's agenda has not always lined up with that of the UK, whereas the BVI should be able to tap into the UK and find support there in these and other areas.
We don't want to go back to a position where we have to rely on Britain for aid, and they should not want us to get to that position where we have to rely on them. But yet still, they're not looking after our interests. We've had to look after our own interests. And we have the 2 main pillars. You have financial services, and certainly in relation to financial services, I think generally speaking we can say that we have had to look after our own interests, and our interest doesn't always align with that of the United Kingdom. Now in relation to tourism, where do the British tourists go? I mean, they go to Barbados. They go to Barbados in relation to the Caribbean. And where else do they go? Well, St. Lucia and Antigua, but outside, where do they really go? They go to the United States of America. They're in droves in the United States of America. I mean, you come through the Miami International Airport, and there are tons of them. You know, they're still having the pina coladas and the rum punches, you know, right until they touch down at Heathrow or Gatwick. So they're going to the United States in droves, and nobody said that they should not. But certainly your point, we should be able to tap in as fellow British citizens to some of our own fellow citizens there in terms of our tourism product, and it help us to ensure that our tourism product continues to grow, and we don't have to slip backwards, and that we can support developmental aspects that we need money for in order to support those developmental aspects.
Ferrara suggested that the UK facilitate the overseas territories singly or jointly by uniting those with common interests to have a voice or representation in the UK that could help to influence in the decision-making process. This, he said, would benefit the territories in the long run.
When we look at, for example, financial services, that's an area in which the interests of the United Kingdom and that of the BVI don't always line up. And so we have to bear that in mind. But one of the things that's important to us is having a direct voice on certain international forums where decisions are being taken that could adversely affect our main pillars, particularly financial services, that the United Kingdom should facilitate us either singularly as an OT or jointly with other OTs who have a similar interest, to have some kind of voice and representation here that ultimately we can seek to influence that decision making, because we get a decision that adversely affects one of our main pillars. It has certain consequences for economy and the employment of our people, our revenue, our standard of living, etc., etc. And you can see that happening even in tourism with this tax, that travel tax that was imposed, right? Yes, I mean that's an important issue, and all the representation that have been made so far by Caribbean governments have I think not achieved any real significant result in that area. So there are things that can be done in which the United Kingdom can assist us. And we must exploit those areas, but we must be able to identify them for ourselves. And it must not be mandatory, and it must not be a situation where essentially the advice or dictates from a department functionary in the United Kingdom is what we must accept in our government and our department here in the BVI.
Speaking about the existing white paper, which the UK under its new government is attempting to reform, Elise Donovan said that through the consultations, the UK appears to be attempting to unite all of its departments that deal with overseas territories, so they will all be on the same page regarding how these territories are approached, rather than having separate agendas to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, which directly manages the overseas territories.
I think the United Kingdom, through this exercise, is trying to coalesce all the various agencies, departments within the United Kingdom government that deal with the overseas territories. Yes, we are managed directly through the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, but nonetheless we have relationships with the different offices who may have different objectives in their relations with us. For example, the Treasury may want to deal with us on getting us to tax more, but that may not be the objective of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. I think they want to coalesce all these various departments and agencies and put everybody on the same page with how they relate to the overseas territories, and that is why they are going through this exercise as well. And hopefully they can all understand that we are British citizens and that we should be afforded the same privileges and opportunities, although we do not have voting rights. And I think unless you reside in the UK, you probably won't have voting rights. And one of the things in 1999, when they gave us the passports, I think it was also to bring into compliance with their perception, more so than anything else, that they were afforded sort of unequal rights to some territories and not affording to others, because Gibraltar and the Falkland Islands already had full citizenship and we did not have it, as some would say black countries, but the white countries were afforded it. So to take away that perception, it was one of the reasons that they brought it into alignment.
The economic and political climate that currently exists in the UK have led to severe cuts by the government. According to Najan Christopher, In light of the UK's economic state, it becomes clearer why certain steps are being employed by the UK to ensure its overseas territories are taking into consideration such aspects of the White Paper discussions as financial management and economic planning.
They've had severe cuts in the United Kingdom, in their own government. And so when it comes to the territories, or whether or not the territories are costing the British taxpayer money, as elected officials, they have some answers to give, right? They have to appear to be accountable to the British taxpayers about why they're having to finance, for example, an airport in St. Helena, when we just cut off the assistance that we have for students, and in fact almost triple the cost of going to school. A British citizen trying to go to school in the UK, especially tertiary education, the cost of that just went up like 3 times. I mean, it's something that's going to affect all students as well, but these are some of the things that they are facing. And so you might have heard about the riots that they had, that the students had, and things of that nature. So it's a very, uncertain and unstable to some extent situation, as well as what happened in Turks and Caicos is underscoring any act on their part to want to appear to be in control and to not be exposing the Treasury, the UK Treasury, to liability unnecessarily, especially in this kind of time. So when you understand a bit also about the politics that's happening in the UK, it might make a bit more sense as to why they're taking this approach as opposed to the approach that was taken, for example, in 1999.
But the panelists weren't the only ones giving their views on the White Paper. During the public forum and radio broadcast, many residents voiced their concerns about the document. Some asked if, while speaking about supporting the overseas territories, the UK was in fact seeking ways to help the BVI stimulate its economy, even by pointing its citizens to vacation there. And there were those who questioned whether or not the BVI really will benefit from forging closer ties with the UK, arguing that in many instances, such a tie means giving up more than one may want to. Other questions and concerns were also voiced by those who participated in the forum.
I still have some suspect about some of these questions, in particular the one where I think it relates to what do we think, or how can we forge a closer relationship with the UK. I'm asking myself, do we really want a closer relationship with the UK? Yes, we are territory, but to me sometimes when you talk about a closer relationship, it almost seems like you have to give up, or you will be giving up a lot of what you enjoy now in order to forge that closer relationship. So I'm wondering if there's a report somewhere, or have anybody had the opportunity to talk to whoever relates to the Premier's office and the overseas office as to whether or not, how they feel themselves about the same questions they're asking.
You're aware of that song? It's a song that's played in the US. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the Virgin Islands. And why that song came to my mind is, it's a song that's played, you're aware of this one? No. This is actually an ad that is played in the United States. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the Virgin Islands, meaning St. Thomas. And why I thought that was important is this is an ad that is played, this is a song that is played in mainland US, telling Americans that, listen, don't watch the rest of the Caribbean. We got our own piece right here. This is what you should pay special attention to. Is this being done in the UK, saying, hey, fellow British nationals, we have our own piece of the Caribbean. Vacation in the Virgin Islands.
We in the OTs have our own aspirations as a people. as to where we would like to see our country be taken, direction that we want to go, how far we've come, and where we want to go. And those aspirations should not, in a sense, be cast aside because some functionaries in the United Kingdom think that we should do something different. And you mentioned early on, and I dealt with this last night, that a lot of the major progress and development made in the territory, in the Virgin Islands, came about because our own representatives were in position and they had the necessary autonomy and authority to do that. And we see the major strides that we have made was not because of any particular decision making on the part of the United Kingdom. It was the decision making that happened with our local representatives and so on in our governments. But it was also done within that framework of the relationship with the United Kingdom.
They have a tendency, I would say, and this is my opinion, there's a tendency to sort of lump us all into one pool. So when something is happening, for example, with the Turks and Caicos, as we saw, there was a bad governance, and the question of how liable does the United Kingdom become when a government runs out of doing the right thing, and as such they had to step in and essentially run the show. So they want to put measures in place, I think, to ensure that that doesn't happen. But that was not what was stated why this review is taking place. That's the official response, is that they want to strengthen the relationship with the overseas territories.
What we're looking at here is perhaps Britain's concern about risk mitigation, right? It's looking at perhaps things like reputational risk. It's looking at things like catastrophic risk. It's looking at things like financial risk. So it's looking at how best it can manage these potential risks, particularly in the current environment that we are in. And therefore you have things like the contingent liability. We also have to look at the history of actual liability versus contingent liability and see how that has evolved over time and the extent to which these actions may be draconian, maybe sufficient or inefficient.
I think really and truly what was allowed to happen, the UK has to accept complete responsibility for the failure in their mandate to the territories. They should not have allowed that stage to be reached. And indeed, I believe they dropped the ball. And we, I agree with you, must make sure that we behaved in such a way that this would not happen to us. But I believe that the UK government must accept full responsibility for the deterioration of governance in the territories.
According to the Premier's office, the deadline set by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office for the discussions and responses to the online questionnaire has passed. However, the UK is continuing to accept feedback from overseas territories on the white paper via the FCO website. As it relates to the next step, Director of the Overseas Territories, Tim Colley, will visit the territories this year, where the various suggestions and concerns will be discussed further, with a view to developing what will be a new relationship between the UK and the OTs. This is Walter Barrett, Beyond the Headlines.